You may have seen many true crime fans who tend to focus on the smart or highly intelligent serial killers. It's like only the smartest are able to pull off grave murders. But did you know there have been serial killers with borderline IQs that completely dominated the killing spree? What's up guys? In today's video, we will be tackling 7 low IQ serial killers. But before we jump into the video, please make sure to give us a like and subscribe to our channel. With that out of the way, let's move on with the video. Top 7 low IQ serial killers. Number 1. Fred West, IQ 84. In the 1970s and 1980s, a British serial killer dominated the serial killing scene. He was Fred West, who committed at least 12 murders with his wife, Rose West. His IQ score of 84 is considered to be in the borderline range, meaning that he may have had some difficulty with specific cognitive tasks and adaptive skills. Despite his low IQ, he was known for committing horrific acts of violence, including the murder and mutilation of young women and girls, many of whom were acquaintances or lodgers in their homes. The victims' bodies were discovered buried in the garden and under the floor of their home at 25 Cromwell Street, Gloucester. The case came to light in 1994 when Fred West was arrested on suspicion of the murder of his daughter, Heather. He was arrested in 1994 and charged with multiple counts of murder. It's jarring how Fred never got to face trial because he committed suicide before that. On the other hand, his wife, Rose West, was convicted of 10 murders in 1995 and is currently serving a life sentence. The case received widespread media attention and was considered one of the most shocking and disturbing criminal cases in British history. Number 2. Henry Lee Lucas, IQ 85. Henry Lee Lucas was an American serial killer who was convicted of 11 murders but is believed to have committed many more. Lucas had a reported IQ of 85, standing in the borderline range. One of the key elements that called into question Henry Lee Lucas' intelligence was the inconsistencies of his confessions. He initially confessed to committing hundreds of murders, but many of his confessions were later found to be false or could not be substantiated by evidence. For example, in 1983, he confessed to the murder of Orange Socks, an unidentified woman found in Texas. However, DNA testing proved that Lucas was not the killer. Another example of the inconsistencies in his confessions came when he confessed to the murder of a woman in Michigan. The victim's body was exhumed and Lucas was brought to Michigan for a lineup. However, the victim's brother, who had discovered her body and initially identified her, said Lucas was not the man who had killed his sister. These inconsistencies in Lucas's confessions, along with the lack of physical evidence linking him to many of the crimes he confessed to, led investigators to believe that he was not a particularly intelligent individual and that he had fabricated his confessions to gain attention. Number 3. Eileen Wuornos, IQ 81. Known as the Damsel of Death, Eileen Wuornos was an American serial killer who murdered 7 men in Florida between 1989 and 1990. While working as a prostitute, Eileen would offer sexual services to her victims and then shoot them with a gun after they had completed the act. She would then take their money and steal their cars. Wuornos claimed that all of her victims had either raped or attempted to rape her, and that she had acted in self-defense. During her trial, several factors were brought up to show her lack of intelligence. One of them was her background. Wuornos had a traumatic childhood. She was raised by her grandparents and had a history of abuse, prostitution, and alcoholism. Plus, Wuornos' behavior during her trial also raised questions about her intelligence. She made several outbursts in court, and her behavior was often unpredictable. She also had a hard time understanding the legal proceedings, and her defense lawyer stated that she had difficulty following instructions and understanding the gravity of the situation. It seemed the damsel of distress wasn't really the smartest, but she truly fit the nickname. Number 4. Gary Ridgway, IQ 82. Gary Ridgway, also known as the Green River Killer, was an American serial killer who murdered at least 49 women in the state of Washington in the 1980s and 1990s. He was convicted of 49 counts of murder and is currently serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. He targeted women who were involved in prostitution or were considered to be high risk, such as runaways or drug users. He would lure them into his vehicle and then strangle them to death. He would then dispose of the bodies, often leaving them in remote wooded areas or the Green River. He was known to use different tactics to conceal the bodies, such as wrapping them in plastic or weighing them down with rocks. Gary would also frequently return to the crime scenes to move or dispose of the bodies to evade detection by the police. Did you know that the Gary Ridgway case was considered one of the most notorious and extensively investigated in the history of American criminal justice? Despite the killings, Gary wasn't the smartest, as proven by the fact that many of his victims' dead bodies were found close to his home and workplace. Additionally, during the investigation, it was discovered that Ridgway had a low IQ and a low level of education. He was also known to have poor problem-solving and decision-making skills and to have trouble following instructions. Number 5. Otis Toole, IQ 75. Otis Toole was an American serial killer who committed a series of murders, along with his accomplice, Henry Lee Lucas. He was convicted of 6 murders but is believed to have committed many more. Toole's modus operandi is murdering his victims varied. In some cases, he used knives or firearms to kill them. In others, he used strangulation or arson. He was known to target vulnerable individuals such as children and the homeless, as well as individuals he met through Lucas. He was also known for committing acts of necrophilia and for mutilating and desecrating the bodies of his victims. Toole had a reported IQ of 75, which is considered to be in the extremely low range, meaning that he may have had significant difficulty with cognitive tasks and adaptive skills. Toole was known to have a history of mental illness and had a difficulty with decision-making and problem-solving. He wasn't reliable, as proven during interrogations, where he was known to change his story and give inconsistent statements, which made it difficult for the police to establish the truth of his confessions. Number 6. Derek Todd Lee, IQ 65. The Baton Rouge serial killer. Derek Todd Lee was an American serial killer who was active in Louisiana from 1992 to 2003. He was convicted of the murder of 7 women and is believed to have killed several more. He was well known to be of low intelligence, with a reported IQ of 65. Despite this, he evaded capture for several years while committing multiple murders. One way in which his lack of intelligence was evident in his crimes was in the way he left DNA evidence at several of the crime scenes. He also made mistakes, such as using his phone and credit card, which ultimately led to his capture. Yeah, not the smartest thing to do as a serial killer. Plus, during his trial, experts testified that Lee had poor impulse control and poor judgment, which likely contributed to his criminal behavior. Number 7. John Thomas Straffen, IQ 58. He was a British serial killer who was convicted of the murders of 2 young girls in 1951 and 1952. He was also suspected of killing a 3rd child. Straffen had a low IQ of 58 and a history of mental illness. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia and was deemed psychopathic by doctors. In 1951 and 1952, John Thomas Straffen brutally murdered 2 young girls, Brenda Goddard and Linda Boyer, with their clothing. He was also suspected of killing a 3rd child, Carol Ann Cooper, but was never charged with her murder. Straffen was able to escape from a mental institution and commit these crimes while on the run. His victims were all children, and both of the girls he was convicted of killing were under the age of 10. Straffen was known to have a history of violence, and his victims were all killed similarly. He was sentenced to life imprisonment and spent the majority of his life in various psychiatric hospitals before his death in 2007. He was the longest-serving prisoner in the UK at the time of his death. It's surprising how, despite their low IQ, these serial killers were able to commit such grave murders. What do you think? Let us know in the comments below.